All right, and welcome back to the Prima Law Podcast. I'm your host, attorney James Betsold, and we have a fun little show for you today. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Plato, not the fun hand-forming substance that you probably tasted as a child. That's Play-Doh. We're talking about Plato, Plato, an ancient Greek philosopher who had some really interesting ideas on government, philosophy, politics, and a lot of interesting stuff. This is what they were talking about in Athens about 1800 years ago. And we're going to go over some of that today because I think there's a pattern unfolding in the government and in politics today that is a repeat that we need to be aware of. Before we get to that, I want to remind you that we're brought to you by our sponsor, Prima Law. Prima Law is immigration case management for immigration attorneys and immigration professionals. It is a complete case and practice management system. So we have all the tools you need to schedule appointments, to monitor your cases. We have a wonderful case management board where you can see the status of all your different cases that you're working on. We have all the tools for preparing your applications for visas for your clients. And you can use our very convenient package assembly tool, recently updated. Also, we have those electronic filing tools. So if you want to file that application online and save some time and postage, you can do that as well. You can find a full 15-day trial at prima.law. That's www.prima.law. Now, let's get started. Okay, now let's talk about who this Plato is first, right? Plato was an ancient Greek philosopher. His thoughts profoundly shaped the intellectual foundation of Western civilization. He was born into an influential family in Athens. He was a student of Socrates and later taught Aristotle, so some very other famous philosophers. He forms a direct line of philosophical mentorship that remains central to philosophical theory and thought today. He founded the Academy in Athens, the first higher learning institution in the West, which operated for centuries and educated future leaders and thinkers. He wrote more than 20 dialogues, which is a unique style that used dramatic conversations to explore ethics, politics, metaphysics, and the theory of knowledge. His most famous work is The Republic, where he outlines his vision of a just society governed by philosopher kings. He introduced some crucial ideas like the theory of forms, timeless, perfect archetypes behind all things, a systemic approach to logic and reason, and the belief that education and virtue are the cornerstones of a good society. Plato's legacy endures because his work addressed foundational questions: justice, the nature of reality, citizenship, leadership, and these things have influenced philosophy, science, politics, and even modern democracy. Okay, so one of the key ideas that in Plato's Republic, the Republic, right, that he shares is the idea of a cycle of governments, right? So he says, well, governments of people typically roll out in this order, and this is a cycle that ends up repeating itself if people are not just and wise. So the cycle begins with aristocracy, or rule by the wise. Okay, so the ideal government governed by philosopher kings. It's guided by reason, justice, and the pursuit of truth. Okay, now you could probably imagine that those in the European empires took this philosophy to heart. They said, oh, well, yes, we have an aristocracy. We are the wise. Therefore, this is the ideal government. Even Plato agrees. Citizens are ordered according to virtue and talent: rulers, philosophers, guardians, soldiers, and producers or workers. The motivation of everyone should be the good of the whole, not individual ambition. Now, this never quite plays out this way, does it? No, because people are self-interested. This is the whole reason communism doesn't work. It's because nobody really gives a care about the good of the whole. On a macro scale, people are way more concerned about whether they're going to be able to eat food tomorrow than they are about the unproven beliefs and hopes and dreams of a rational world. Okay? So that's step number one, aristocracy. Now, aristocracy eventually dissolves. It devolves. The decline begins when successors to philosopher kings crave power and recognition. Some would say this always happens in the first generation. A society governed by warriors and proud, disciplined, but preoccupied with reputation rather than truth. This is more of the might makes right. This sort of thing becomes popular then. They call this a timocracy. I don't know if it's because it was named after a guy Tim or Timmy, but the timocratic man values battle, discipline, and rank above justice or equality. So if you think about a militarized or honor-driven state such as Sparta, right, Plato would look at them and say, yes, they are already down this evolution of governments. And what comes after a timocracy? Oligarchy. Okay, now you may have heard the word oligarch, right? We talk about Russian oligarchs all the time because we know that the dictator Putin, he has a group of oligarchs, essentially a group of aristocratic dudes who are wealthy, right? He gives them, you get this oil field, you get that oil field, you get this energy sector, you get that energy sector, you get to control this part of the economy. And that's the way that he keeps them in power, keeps them loyal. Okay, so when honor gives way to greed, the ambitious seek material gain and political power through wealth. Economic inequality expands. A small elite dominates a resentful, poor majority. The oligarchic man becomes cautious. Sound like Putin? Cautious, divided between desire for wealth and fear of losing it. Yeah, sounds like him as well. Plato warns that injustice festers in this imbalance as reason becomes enslaved to greed. Now, I think as we look at a country like Russia, it's a lot easier to see how these things have played out, right? During the fall of the Soviet Union, they dabbled briefly in a Republican form of government, in a democratic form of government. And then, of course, Putin came to power, and he has not left power, even amended the Constitution so he could stay there indefinitely. And kills people in the opposition, poisons them, polonium poisoning in jail, right? Tortures them, jails the opposition so that they don't get to speak. And then when he does something stupid like invading Ukraine, nobody's allowed to say anything against it out of fear of, well, if it's an oligarch, they're going to lose their money. And if it's just a regular person, they're going to end up in jail or on the front lines. Okay. So after an oligarchy, everything sort of transitions into a democracy because the poor revolt. Now, Russia has seen this as well. What was it called? Not the bourgeoisie. It was the perestroika, right? Perestroika, where the poor overthrow, the Russian emperor at the time, overthrow the king and the royal family, and they institute communism, right? So ideally, that was supposed to be more democratic. So as the world turns, oligarchies devolve into democracy because the poor revolt. They overthrow the oligarchs and establish a government of equality and liberty, okay? Now, I think when we read about that or when we see, equality and liberty, we want to think the United States of America. We think of overthrowing a ruthless king who sent armies to kill his people and keep his empire in check, but savagely murdered many Americans in the fight for liberty. Immigration of values, so migration of values. Freedom replaces discipline. Authority is distrusted. Everyone becomes their own ruler. And this is a thought that we saw among the founders of the United States at the founding of the United States, right? Everybody distrusted a strong central government. Everybody distrusted a president if he were given too much power. And when they thought he was taking too much power for himself, they would call him a king. Okay, and so this was the ultimate insult in colonial times in the United States, is to call someone a king, because a king they saw as worse than the dirt that they trampled under their feet. Okay, so now, some of these things might be starting to sound familiar. We just had the No Kings protest, right? Because as American tradition has it, when we feel like there is a president who is assuming too much power for himself, we accuse him of being a king. And we try and remind everyone that, hey, we are not a land of kings. We're a land of citizens. We have a Republican form of democracy where every citizen has a right to vote and have their vote recorded and heard. Okay, so the democratic man, according to Plato, pursues liberty above all, creating a society of competing impulses and chaos. And Plato admires its vibrance, but critiques its instability. Unbounded freedom ends in disorder. Okay, now when we read about the founding of the United States and, first the Articles of Confederation to help the 13 colonies work together, and later the adoption of the U.S. Constitution, we see that the founders were very well aware of Plato's cycle of governments and how they morph from one into another, usually in a bad way. And so they said, you know what? Let's not give unbridled authority to a president. Let's not give unbridled authority to the people either. Okay, ultimately, we vote on stuff, we vote on our representatives, but it's our representatives who are delegated a form of power from us, right? So it's not a direct democracy that we live in. If we lived in a direct democracy, we would all be voting on every single issue that's supposed to go before the legislature right now. Okay, so we don't have a direct democracy. We have a representative democracy. We elect our senators, our representatives, and the president, and the only ones we don't really elect are the Supreme Court and other judges, right? Those at the federal level are appointed. Okay, Plato does warn us, though, that democracy unfettered devolves into tyranny. Out of democracy's chaos arises the protector or demagogue who promises safety and order. Initially hailed as a defender of the people, the tyrant consolidates power, purges rivals, and rules by fear. Freedoms vanish under the weight of surveillance, propaganda, and violence. The tyrannical man is enslaved by desires, a reflection of the most disordered soul, according to Plato. Now, when we talk about tyrants, we can talk about, we can take, Vladimir Putin as an example, right? He rules as a tyrant, right? There is no freedom of press in Russia, really, to be spoken of. He has consolidated his power so he can hold on to it even while abusing the crap out of his country and out of his countrymen, and out of the fact that he's sending over 1 million to die on the front lines in a war that ultimately serves little practical purpose except to inflate his ego. And what are the other things? Yeah, consolidation of power, right? Purging rivals, right? What happened to the last man who tried to run in an election against Putin? Died in jail, torture, poisoning, he dead. Okay, not alive anymore. Weight of surveillance, propaganda, and violence. Okay, I can't speak much to, but we know that surveillance goes heavy in Soviet Union. It's also heavy in China, and surveillance, thanks to companies like Palantir and some of these AI companies that are working hand in hand with the U.S. federal government now, it's hard to say that we don't live in a surveillance state at this very moment, especially with all the revelations that we had from Edward Snowden, right? Edward Snowden is the name. So we know from Edward Snowden that the U.S. government is all signals out there, all digital signals, it's reading them, right? As I'm recording this podcast, very possible that the U.S. government has access to it if they wanted to. If they wanted to watch me or see what was going on in the recording of this amazing, amazing podcast. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of things start to pop up here. Now, under tyranny, right, purges rivals, rules by fear, freedoms vanish under the weight of surveillance, propaganda, and violence. So let's talk about propaganda. I don't know if you saw this recently, but pretty much all of the U.S. federal agencies, the executive agencies, run ultimately by the President of the United States. So we're talking the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, right? The Department of Agriculture, the Department of Education. All of these different departments are putting out partisan messages now, either blaming the Democrats or the left for something, or literally dookying on American citizens, even directly from the White House. And the president himself posted some very interesting AI-generated videos with that type of messaging. Now, not only is this a potential, it's a violation of what's called the Hatch Act, which says the government agencies need to act in a politically neutral manner as they execute their responsibilities. Let's review some of those provisions right now. Federal employees and covered state and local employees cannot use their official authority to interfere with or affect the result of an election. They may not run for office in a partisan election or solicit or contribute to political campaigns while on duty or in the workplace. Employees may not solicit campaign donations, distribute campaign materials, or publicly display partisan political items while at work or using a government vehicle. Employees are allowed certain political activities outside work hours and away from government facilities, but further restricted employees, like some law enforcement and intelligence officials, are subject to additional limitations even off duty. Violations can result in disciplinary actions, including removal from federal service, a reduction in grade, salary, suspension, reprimand, or civil penalties. The act aims to maintain a federal workforce free from inappropriate partisan influence. It applies to most executive branch federal employees and to certain state and local government employees working on federally funded programs. However, the president and vice president are exempt, okay? But the rest of the government is not. So when there's a video that the Department of Homeland Security puts out and wants to show at every airport in the United States, blaming the Democrats, blaming liberals, blaming the left, blaming the opposing political party, that's partisan, right? You've wandered into partisan territory, which is going to be a violation of the Hatch Act. Now let's just see if there's anyone left to enforce it. Okay, so as we're seeing some of these things, I want to point your attention to some of the recent events that we've seen here in the United States. And I'm not saying recently like in the last couple weeks. Let's look at the last few presidential administrations. Do you realize it's been quite a while, it's been years since the United States Congress passed a budget? It's literally their one job, right? Under the Constitution, their job is to pass a budget. It's mandated by the Constitution, but there's no teeth to that mandate. There's no punishment if they fail to do it. It's supposed to be on us as voters to vote them out if they can't create a budget. So instead, they pass these continuing resolutions, which keep the government running, and we've now run up to $38 trillion in debt. But a few years ago, it was just a couple trillion in debt, and now we're at 38. You realize that today in 2025, from January to now, the government increased its debt by about $2 trillion. $2 trillion is a lot of money. Okay. Do you have any idea what we can do with $2 trillion? What happens if instead of spending that money, we say, you know what, let's take that $2 trillion and we'll divide it among the 300 million Americans. And I'm just going to run a real quick calculation here. It's about $6,600 per person. That ain't bad. $2 trillion. Spending $2 trillion is enough by some studies to end world hunger. $2 trillion should be enough to end a few wars. $2 trillion should be enough to pay for college education for everyone who wants one in the United States. $2 trillion is probably enough to pay for everybody's health care in the United States for probably more than 1 year. Okay? $2 trillion is a lot of money, and that's how much our government has added to the debt since January of 2025. Now, we see the U.S. Congress is unable to fulfill some very basic core constitutional functions, right? Passing a budget. What else are they unable to do? Well, ever since Iraq the first time, I believe in Iraq in the 90s, right, when the U.S. invaded Iraq under George H.W. Bush to push them out of Kuwait, which apparently it sure looks like we encouraged them to go into. Either way, there was a declaration of war then. I remember that. Since then, we have not had a declaration of war. We've had a declaration of a war on terror, which gave the president unfettered activity or unfettered ability to go and fight America's enemies who are defined, I guess, as anybody committing acts of terror or groups that are funding terror or whatever. Is a pretty open-ended invitation to war. But what have we not had? We have not had a declaration of war. And we've gone to war. We've had a war in Afghanistan. We've had a war in Iraq. We had essentially a war in, Libya under Obama, where we sent in all sorts of drones to do the job. It looks like we're getting ready to start a war in the Southeast Southeast Asia over by China. China looks like they want to take Taiwan. And it really looks like we're about to start a war with Venezuela. Venezuela. We're sending a carrier strike group to Venezuela. Okay, now, the cover story for that, or supposedly the reason we're going, ostensibly the reason we're going, is because we need to blow up more drug boats, which we're already doing, right? We're blowing up drug boats in international water when usually we would be stopping them, detaining them, arresting them, proving that, yeah, these are not fishermen, these are drug mules. Now, no doubt some of those have got to be drug runners. For sure, that submarine was. That's a pretty notorious thing that happens. Drug cartels taking submersibles and transporting drugs to the U.S. that way. But there was at least one boat that they hit, and there were survivors, and there were Colombians, and they were fishermen. So we have a U.S. president who's taking unilateral action, and I don't know if he's officially invoking the war on terror for that, or if he's going to start another war on drugs, whether the Congress votes on it or not. But the other thing is there's nobody in Congress to stop them. There's no strong leaders in Congress in an opposition party who are able to say, no, Mr. President, you need a declaration of war in order for us to activate the armed forces in that manner. So we're seeing some of these things degrade, right? And unfortunately, what history has taught us is many of the wars that we've joined have been the result of false flag operations. What's a false flag operation, you might ask? You don't listen to Alex Jones? You don't know what that means? Great, I'll tell you. It's where something is staged in order to get the U.S. involved in a war. For example, we can go, I don't know if there's many experts here on the Spanish-American War. That was a war where we ended up getting Cuba and Puerto Rico, and if I'm not mistaken, some other islands in the Caribbean as well. But in the Spanish-American War, we also end up getting the Philippines as part of that before we give them their liberty back. But how do we get involved in that? Well, there's an explosion. I believe it's on the USS Maine, right? You can fact check me on that. I think that's the name of the boat. It's after an American state anyway, but I'm pretty sure it's the USS Maine. It blows up, I think in a harbor or near Havana or near Cuba or something. Anyways, it blows up. And then, the main media moguls of the day say, hey, we were blown up. We were attacked. We got to go to war. William Randolph Hearst, I believe is the name. His newspapers are the ones that reported this. Turns out years later, after we find it, send some scuba divers down, we see that it's an explosion that comes from the inside of the ship out. So it's not that we were hit with a torpedo or some sort of bomb or missile. No, it was detonated from the inside out. Okay, so false flag operation. We get involved in a war. We win it, thank goodness. End up with some extra territories, and that's that, right? That's not the end of it, though. We could go through probably every major war and point out what is either confirmed or suspected as a false flag operation. And we can say confidently that Vietnam was exactly that, the false flag operation to get us involved in that. We're seeing now, just today in the news, Venezuela's reporting that they've arrested CIA operatives in Venezuela, getting ready to start a false flag operation. We can't confirm that. They've said things like that before. Crazier things have happened, though. I mean, this could be something that's going on. We can't write it out of the world of possibilities at this point, but it is something that we are going to want to pay attention to, because we see Maduro on TV saying, no war, only peace, peace forever, no crazy war, only peace. Okay, so he desperately wants peace, which would make sense because he knows that the United States, could level Venezuela pretty quickly, and it would be awful for them. Awful for them. More awful than it already, well, maybe not more awful than it already is. I mean, they're dealing with corruption that's so bad and the undeveloped resources that they have. Here's a fun story. So part of what we do for a living, part of what I do for a living, is I have a team of software developers located in Colombia. My wife is Colombian, so from time to time we go to Colombia. And, we visit in her hometown occasionally. And one time, this is a few years ago now, when the hyperinflation was just beginning in Venezuela, where people's life savings, the only thing they could do with it is perhaps buy a loaf of bread if they could find it, right? And so in her hometown, in the hinterlands of Colombia, this is not a border town. This is nowhere near the border with Venezuela. But so many millions of Venezuelans poured into Colombia looking for work, looking for food, looking for a job, looking for something to do to be able to keep living, that many Venezuelans ended up in her town, and, causes all sort of social unrest. And when we look at the numbers of, Venezuelans who came to the U.S. applying for U.S. citizenship, a lot of times those were the more wealthy ones because they were able to travel to the United States. A lot of times the only other, people's only other option was walking, hitchhiking, maybe borrowing a car, borrowing a motorcycle, getting as far as you can on the gas and begging for money along the way. But there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Venezuelans who made it all the way deep into the interior of Colombia. And we saw them there. And of course, they're unfortunately very hungry. And so many end up begging. But we stopped, gave them some money, because my goodness, here I am walking around with $100 bills in my pocket and I see people starving. And so what they would do is you give them a donation and they give you some Venezuelan currency because it was literally not even worth the paper it was printed on. So I actually have a little collection at home of some of this Venezuelan currency that they gave me when I donated some money to them. And what they were even saying then is they said, look, this isn't our final stopping point. We're actually trying to get to Peru. And we're trying to get to some other country where we can settle, maybe get a work permit, work for minimum wage or less, but at least it's something that'll be better than what they're experiencing in Venezuela. So Venezuela is basically at this point a failed state. Probably, I don't want to sound like a warmonger, but I think maybe one of the best things that could happen to Venezuela is if they were conquered by the United States. Now, apparently we're not in the business of conquering countries and taking their territory. But even being conquered by the United States, having an end to hostilities, we're usually sending a ton of money for rebuilding, right? Take a look at Europe post-World War II. Take a look at Japan post-World War II. Take a look at any country post us being at war with them, maybe with the exception of Afghanistan. But I think even Iraq probably is better off today than they were under Saddam Hussein. So whether war is a good idea or not, whether this is going to be ultimately a good thing for Venezuela or not, what we need to be worried about is America devolving into a tyranny, right? Because what we have is a Congress that's not able to maintain or not able to perform its basic functions anymore in many circumstances. And we have a very powerful presidency that is not being required to get declarations of war in order to engage the army and go to war. We're seeing a very powerful presidency. Now we're going to turn it into, let's look at what we're seeing in the news today, right? Where we're able to send a federal police force. Now, Americans are not used to a federal police force. We're used to the FBI, right? The FBI has jurisdiction over interstate crime, things like that, right? When there's banking offenses that happen over, state boundaries, international boundaries, things like that. Yeah, you need an FBI for that sort of thing. Human trafficking, yes, we need an FBI for those things. In some cases, drugs, yeah, in some cases, we do need an FBI for that. But if you'll notice, if you're driving down the street, you've never been pulled over by the FBI for speeding, right? You've never been pulled over by the FBI for driving without a license or driving erratically, or you've never had the FBI come to your house on a complaint for domestic violence or an assault or something like that. It's not the FBI's job, right? As a country, we don't have a federal police force that's involved in civil matters like this, civil or criminal matters that are distinct to each state. And that's because the U.S. Constitution tells us not to. The 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution reserves police power. the authority to legislate for the health, safety, and welfare of citizens to the states through the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment states, here we go, ready? The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. This amendment is the source of state police power and is central to the concept of federalism in U.S. law. While the word police power does not explicitly appear in the text of the Constitution, judicial interpretation has consistently upheld that the federal government does not possess a general police power. This broad authority remains with the states unless specifically preempted by federal law or limited by other constitutional provisions. Okay, so when we see a very strong president, in a very strong way, building up with over $1.6 billion in funding from the big old beautiful bill, building up a domestic police force, right? Ostensibly, this is for immigration purposes, but they are not limiting their jurisdiction to immigrants. They are pulling over, they're detaining U.S. citizens. They're stopping U.S. citizens. They're not following the Fourth Amendment, which in a previous episode we reviewed, requires reasonable suspicion and probable cause. Reasonable suspicion for the stop, probable cause to make an arrest. They're doing all of that without it. They're making these arrests without it. It's a very dangerous situation, especially because when we look back to Plato's pattern, right? Plato's cycle of governments, this is the sort of thing he describes when he talks about a democracy, or in our case, a republic, devolving into tyranny. Okay? Freedoms vanish under the weight of surveillance, propaganda, and violence. What are they doing when they're stopping you and saying, hey, you black kid, are you an American citizen? And the black kid says, F you, I don't have to talk to you. You have probable cause? You have a reasonable suspicion? Leave me alone. F off. What are they saying? You're detained. Stop right now. And they pull out a smartphone. They're taking a picture and scanning the identity of this individual. They are performing a search. They're performing a seizure by stopping him, detaining him, and then they're searching simply by trying to take a picture of his face. And now they can run it against these enormous databases, again, brought to you in part by Palantir. Go buy their stock, PLTR. It's already maxed out its value, probably. This is not financial advice. Don't buy their stock. All right, but it was very popular on Reddit not too long ago. Made a lot of people a lot of money. But that's the reason it made people a lot of money, is because they kept securing more and more government contracts for their work. And they can do things like this. Take a picture of you and know who you are in very short order. You know, they've also, the same company is signing agreements with all sorts of governments across the globe. Not all of them having the same constitutional protections that we do. Right? But we got to watch out. We're seeing things devolve. There is not supposed to be a federal police power that can come and detain you. We're the United States of America. We don't have an SS. Okay, but this whole papers, please, like, hey, you, prove to me you're a citizen. I don't have to. The burden is on the police to prove that I'm not a citizen. Okay, and there's a little secret, right? Here's one of the reasons that immigration judges and immigration prosecutors, right? ICE chief counsel, OPLA, you can call them by whatever you want, DHS counsel, but they are the attorneys and the prosecutors who work for ICE. Here's what they hate. They hate it when they show up at immigration court. And there's a flood of cases coming in right now, as you can imagine. But if you show up to immigration court and you say, hey, what gives, judge? And the judge is starting the procedure, and the judge, whenever they start the hearing, hey, these are the allegations, you know, that you're not a U.S. citizen, that you entered at an unknown time, at an unknown location. How does your client wish to respond? And that was a brand new attorney. I've seen, and I've done this myself, made the mistake of saying, not guilty, Your Honor, and the judge will chew you out and say, it's not about guilt or not guilt. You either concede or deny the allegations, okay? They hate it when you deny the allegations. Okay, now we're not breaking the law by denying the allegations. We're not lying to the court by denying the allegations. What we're saying is we're going to hold the government to their duty to prove the allegations that they've brought when they detained this individual claiming that they're not a U.S. citizen. The burden of proof is on the government. You should not have to be in a position where the government comes to you, where ICE or Border Patrol come to you to detain you and make you prove your legal status in the United States. Most people don't have a passport. Nobody walks around with a birth certificate. I don't. Why should I? I'm an American citizen. And frankly, your word on that should be enough, especially if they're coming to harass you. So this is something that it might seem odd, right? If any of my listeners out there are originally from another country, such as, maybe Colombia, maybe Brazil. I know it's very, very common in other countries that you have like the military police and the civil police, right? Where essentially it's more of a federal thing and more of a state type thing. But here in the United States, we have local police powers with each individual state, which is why you have the Michigan State Police. You also have a county sheriff. And in cities that have their charter, they have their own police department for that city. But you don't have FBI police or ICE police regularly, and you shouldn't have them patrolling your neighborhoods trying to keep you safe. That's not their job. That's not what they're doing. They shouldn't be patrolling your neighborhoods, stopping you, stopping anyone, stopping your neighbors, stopping your gardeners, stopping your construction workers, stopping your employees, stopping your staff, threatening your staff. We had quite an interesting go around with an individual here in a very white town in Michigan. One of the things we were offering as a law firm, right? So I'm attorney James Betsold. I have an immigration law firm. We've been offering a service where we'll review your case for free. Initially, it's a free initial consultation. If you sign up and do that, and then my staff will run you through a screening before it gets to me. And we had someone who my staff asked him if he would repeat or spell the street he's on, because there's a lot of weird Dutch names around here. Okay. There's a lot of strange names. And for a Spanish native speaker, it might be a little complicated to get it right the first time, right? That's why we always have patience with each other. And as a firm, we have a rule. We're only going to serve you if you're nice. Okay. We don't serve mean people. And this is actually a business tip I picked up from a scuba instructor. And he shared a story once, as I was getting my scuba certification with him, and one of a good family friend. He said, I only work for nice people. So first you got to tell me, are you a nice person? And then he shared a story of a couple that was going to be going on their honeymoon, and they needed to get certified. And the fiance looked a little upset about something. And so when they were getting started to get ready to put the gear on and get in the pool and start the scuba classes, he asked, and he said, I only serve nice people. Are you both nice people? Are you kind? And apparently the young lady, who was already a little upset, said he's not. And then she stormed out. And then, of course, he stormed out too. So important to serve nice people. We only have so much time on this planet. We have so much good that we can do for each other. It'd be a pity to waste it. And to waste our energies on someone who's just not going to reciprocate with kindness, right? So we had to unfortunately let this person know that because they started swearing at my staff, we were not going to serve them. And of course, their response to that was, well, I'm going to call ICE on you guys. I'm going to tell them that you have illegals working there. I'm going to tell them that, and we don't. Not at all. Okay. And as I looked up this individual to figure out what his problem was, I see him posting a lot of, peaceful, religiously oriented posts. He's a father, has a child, has a spouse, but unfortunately was not nice. Okay. So we only like to work for nice people. That's what's important. As we look for solutions, let's see, how far are we in our show today already? I'm looking at the time. Oh, we're about 42 minutes in. Wow, time flies. Let's move along. I want to cover a couple other things, okay? I want to look at what can we do to guard against the rise of tyranny, right? And it may sound dramatic, but we've had tyrants as U.S. presidents before. Remember, we jailed, put in military prison camps, all the Japanese during World War II, even Japanese that had generations of living here, absolutely no evidence of un-American activity, no evidence of treasonous activity, no evidence of crime being committed, property seized, they're jailed for the duration of the war. Okay, we've had tyrants in America before. There's only a few things we can really do. One, we try and hold our leaders accountable, right? So if you have a representative or senator, the Democrats it's funny because I'm going to say the Democrats are acutely aware of this right now. They weren't before, okay? When Japanese were being jailed, I'm pretty sure they were on the side that was jailing the Japanese. Now, this was quite some time ago before you and I, but the lesson is the same. The political party system tends to defend their man when they're in power, their president in power. Okay, but it's something we always need to be aware of always. So right now, as we're talking about Donald Trump, we're going to say, if you have a Republican representative or senator, call them, tell them your concerns, ask what they're going to do about it. Okay, maybe support a candidate who's able to verbalize why what's going on is inappropriate, even if it's on their side of the political spectrum. We see politicians like Rand Paul saying, hey, there's no declaration of war here. Now, he's in the president's own party. He's always been a little bit off of the mainstream Trump agenda, of course. But here's an example of someone in the party who says, hey, we're going the wrong way. This is not great. And of course, all the Democrats are going to say that now because they're in the opposition party. But we need to remember this. We need to remember that this happens because next time, maybe we have a Democratic president and we start doing the same thing. Because that's what's been happening. Okay? So we need to guard against that. So reach out to our representatives. The other thing we need is we need good people. We need kind people. Plato said the only way that you can maintain something like a democracy or a good form of government is with wise people. Wise, civically minded people. An educated population. Okay? Now in the United States, what are we popular for? Well, if you get sick, you're going to go bankrupt, probably. Unless you have insurance. And even if you have insurance, they're probably going to deny your claim because they're a business and they do all sorts of nonsense. The other time you're going to spend a lot of money is if you want an education. Okay? Some of us went into a lot of debt to get the credentials that we have. I'm not talking just about lawyers, okay, of which I am one, and of which I did have to spend a lot of money to get those credentials and to get that education. But we're talking about doctors, right? We have a shortage of nurses and doctors in the United States. Why? Because part of it is it's so friggin' expensive to do it, okay? And who wants to be in debt for years and years and years and years and years without much of a hope of paying it all off? And the prospect of diminishing returns. And, right, so there's some things that are fundamentally wrong with the country. Education is suffering, which puts us in a huge risk category if we're thinking about Plato and the fact that we need an educated population in order to maintain liberty. And it wasn't just Plato. The founding fathers said the same thing. So just on the topic of education, here are a few of the words of wisdom from our founding fathers. I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society, but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power. This is by Thomas Jefferson. Okay, also famous for the founding of the University of Virginia, which he said was his greatest achievement, what he was most proud of. And he was a president of the United States. Here's another one. If virtue and knowledge are diffused among the people, they will never be enslaved. This will be their great security. That comes from Samuel Adams, one of the founding fathers. A popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy. That comes from James Madison. And of course, Benjamin Franklin said, on education all our lives depend, and few to that, too few with care attend. Now, education is closely linked with morality and virtue, which Plato would have been all about as well. So I have a couple quotes on that as well. If truth be not diffused, error will be. If virtue be not taught, vice will be. If vigilance be not encouraged, treason will be not discouraged. If our youth are not taught to think and reason, we will be led into error. And that from Daniel Webster. Let's read one more. The education of every rank and class of people, down to the lowest and the poorest, had to be the care of the public and maintained at public expense. Its importance required that no expense would be too extravagant. That's from John Adams. All right, so if we look at the importance that Plato knew and that our founding fathers understood to education and morality and virtue, which are intertwined, right? They're connected. The more educated you are in what are the moral and good things I should be doing, right? The more educated you are on how to live a virtuous life and make the world a better place, right? Make a better place for me, for you, the entire human race. But instead, if you want to go and obtain that education, we're slapping you with debt. Okay, now I have a lot of friends from high school, who looked at the situation, went to college for a little bit, realized, you know what? Cost-benefit analysis? No. High school was enough. Not interested in being indebted for years and years. You know, a lot of people pay off their student loans over 30 or 40 years. Some of them are able to do it more quickly. That's the preferable way. Go listen to Dave Ramsey if you want to hear the virtues of all of that. But why do we want a society where that's a requirement? So not only do you have to be indebted and typically impoverished while you're going through school, and then left with limited options after school, and then, the moment you start to prosper, you're excluded from other things. And then the next problem that you're worrying about in life is, okay, well, how do I get some form of health security? How do I get some health care so that if I get a disease or something, I won't go broke and bankrupt because of that too? Right? These are big issues. These are big issues that we face as a nation. And so I think education is one of them. Education is definitely one of them. Now, let's not forget. Now, the same founders that gave us those great quotes and really understood the importance of an educated public and how that is vital to maintaining a democratic republic, a representative democracy, into the Constitution under Article 5, they built in a method for the Constitution to be amended, and this has happened a number of times. The first 10 amendments, of course, by the Bill of Rights, and other amendments. Some, for example, making alcohol illegal, and some others undoing that one too, right? Ending prohibition. But the Constitution can be amended in two principal ways. The first one, or the first step, is an amendment needs to be proposed. Now, in Congress, right, a 2/3 majority vote of Congress can propose a constitutional amendment. A 2/3 majority vote is required in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate. An amendment can be proposed in another way. in a way that's never been used. Congress is obligated. They must call a convention for proposing amendments if 2/3 of the state legislatures request it. So if you have the state legislature, and it's just the state legislature, it doesn't say anything about the governor, it doesn't say anything about the House of Representatives. No, the state legislatures can get together and vote and say, you know what? We want a constitutional convention for proposing amendments. I'm sure they would list a few that they want proposed. After an amendment is proposed, it must be ratified by the states through one of two methods as determined by Congress. Okay, the state legislatures can approve it. There must be 3/4 of the state legislatures that approve. So 38 out of 50 state legislatures must approve it. Approval by a special convention in 3/4 of the states is also possible. This has occurred only once for the 21st Amendment repealing prohibition. So it is possible. What is possible? We can amend the Constitution. Is there anything we can amend the Constitution with that would strengthen the Republic, that would obligate or incentivize the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate to do their job, to pass a budget, to eliminate some of the gridlock so that the people's business can be carried out? Is there anything we could pass as an amendment that would obligate the president to get a declaration of war, or maybe not technically war, but maybe to use military force to get authorization from the House and the Senate, from the Congress? Is there anything we could propose that would do that? And the answer is, yeah, there are. There's actually a lot of proposals out there. There are some proposals, and I'm just going to have to review them off the top of my head right now. Some of those proposals include an amendment that says if a budget isn't passed, then none of the representatives or senators are eligible for re-election, and an immediate election must occur, right? The session of Congress is declared closed, and immediately everybody has to go back to the polls and vote for someone else who was not in the House of Representatives and therefore ineligible to hold office again. That's a pretty strong one. I think we would get some compliance. There would be a budget. It may not be a great budget, but there would at least be a budget. There's other amendments that have been proposed, right? If the Supreme Court makes a decision that affects this or that, or has to do with an interpretation of a law or a statute or a constitutional provision, it could be subject to congressional approval. It could be subject to the approval of the different legislatures of the states. Really the sky's the limit. If you amend the Constitution to do something, it becomes the law of the land. So if you wanted to propose a constitutional amendment that said marijuana is not illegal or bad at all, and anyone can have it and use it and sell it and do whatever they want with it recreationally, etc. Well, that's the supreme law of the land. If it passes, nobody else, no state, no federal agency can do boo about it. Okay, if you pass a constitutional amendment that says no daylight savings time ever, okay, that's the law of the land. Nobody can go around it. If you pass a constitutional amendment that says the Supreme Court justices have tenure until they reach the age of 68 or 70 or set some hard limit, or have served 5 or 10 or 15 years, whatever, that becomes the law of the land. Okay, so it's a very powerful tool, not impossible to use. Doesn't specifically require, look here, the president, for example, plays no formal role in the amendment process. It's not up to him. He doesn't get to sign it or veto it. Congress may set a ratification deadline, typically 7 years, though the Constitution does not mandate one. So if there's a proposed amendment and only 30 of the states ratify it, but you needed 38, or however many we said here, what was it? 38 for ratification. Could be 10 years later, finally the last one comes around and then it becomes law. It's been ratified. Okay. So there you have it. There are things that can be done. And I think it's these sort of things that we're going to start seeing. I can tell you in our state, for example, the government was dragging their feet on a program for medical marijuana and dragging their feet. And what happened? We have at our state level, individual citizens can propose amendments to the Constitution. They can propose statutes and new laws. You don't need to go through the legislature always. In fact, the legislature, politically, they probably couldn't figure out how to say that they were going to want to legalize drugs and get reelected next term. But the majority of the people said, yeah, we want that. It gets on the ballot. It's ratified. Okay. There's no reason we might not want that for the United States as a whole. There's a lot of possibilities out there, but one thing we cannot keep moving forward. We should not move in this direction of one man or one government head being able to take so much authority that was never intended for them. Declaring war, engaging the armed forces in an armed conflict without congressional approval, building up a domestic police force to harass, annoy, abuse, shoot at, arrest, detain unlawfully American citizens. Okay, I can tell you from an attorney's perspective, we see this happening, and our first thought is, let's file a suit. Let's sue ICE. If they're gonna arrest and detain U.S. citizens, we are going to sue them, and we'll see how quickly we can whittle down that $1.6 billion federal budget. It's an abuse of constitutional authority. You're going to violate my Fourth Amendment? Okay, well, you're going to have to pay for that. And hopefully it incentivizes the government to stop doing that. But I think what we're seeing is a trend in that direction. And it's very dramatic now. With ICE out on people's streets, all of a sudden we have a police force that is completely contrary to what the Constitution demands and intends. I want to thank you for participating in today's show. There are things that can be done to make the world a better place. I hope through this messaging we can start to build something. I think if more people understand that there are these avenues to amend the Constitution that are really more in our power, we can really force the hand of the government so we can avoid devolving into some sort of tyranny, right? This cycle of governments, this cycle of devolution of governments by Plato, is not a prescription. It's not a written in stone. It's not a fortune or future telling exercise. It's simply a warning to say, hey, if you start to see these things, those are the steps toward tyranny, and we want to avoid those. I'm attorney James Betsold. Thank you for joining with us today on the show. As we close, I'll remind you one more time that we are sponsored by Prima Law. That's prima.law, www.prima.law, which is immigration case management. It's legal case management, form filling, form preparation, petition preparation, software. We have all the tools you need to manage your cases, run your firm. That means sending invoices, sending electronic payments, receiving electronic payments, so you can get paid by your clients. So you can e-file those cases with the government. So you can maintain a thorough record of all the goings on in those cases, so you can make sure that your clients are being well taken care of. You can find all of these features and more, the best tool in the business. We use it every day in our law firm, and we have many clients who are using this, and we want you to know about it as well. Find a free 15-day trial at www.prima.law. Reach out immediately. We'll be reaching out to you so we can walk you through it, get you started, and show you what all the hubbub is about. Thank you for staying with us. Have a great week. Bye-bye.